It is Tuesday, May 21st, 2019, and this is the Pro and the Con Show, and I am your host, Michael James Ott. Welcome to the show. As those of you that have seen the show in the past or heard of it from someone else, I try to do a 15 to 20 minute segment every day. It's live. It's 6 p.m. Central Time. Hosted out of out of my beautiful studio here, my small office in my home in Hudson, Wisconsin. And it's 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern, and 4 p.m. Pacific. And the intent of the show is to help us get past a lot of the bias that's in the news and to embrace the whole truth, as I call it. So the pro and the con, the good and the bad, the for and against. And really encouraging everyone to embrace just the facts and then form their own opinions based on data and facts, as opposed to the opinions, analyses, and other kinds of biased things that are out there from the many sources. And in today's show, on a regular basis, I look through 5 different websites that vary from liberal to kind of mostly non-biased to right-leaning or conservative viewpoints. And the big thing, so it's May 21st, and there's this ongoing power struggle between Congress and Mr. Trump in the White House over various things. And so subpoenas flying around and being ignored, and I'm sure it'll all end up in court. And so rather than talk about that subject, because I don't think there's really anything significantly new there today, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm doing the show. So I mentioned earlier it's to promote dialogue. We're so opinionated these days, and it's really a struggle just to get people to just sit and calmly listen to someone else with an opposing view. And the truth is, we need to do that. And the reason why I'm doing this show and dedicating hundreds of hours a year to producing this show is hopefully people will start watching it on a very large scale, and it will encourage people to be open to that dialogue, to share their views in a fair and reasoned way, and then listen to other people share their views. I think people would find that they're really not that very far apart if they would just take some moments to understand each other. So I'm just absolutely personally convinced that we could be doing so much better than what we're doing, that our governing of ourselves, we've been doing a pretty bad job of that, and that's my fault, that's your fault, that's our fault. Okay, if you're a citizen in one of these many nations and you're not very happy about how the governance is going, that's partially your fault, and because it's up to the people. So in the U.S. we have we had the Declaration of Independence and then the Constitution, and we talk about we the people, and of the people, by the people, then and only then for the people. Now that then part is not in the normal literature, but if we're not doing the by part, if we're not participating, and I'm talking about participation that goes beyond voting, you have to stay involved with your representatives and understand what it is that they are not doing, and the truth is that the vast majority of Americans pay no attention to it whatsoever. They do some some thinking about the issues, and when they're actually getting ready to vote every whatever years that we're having elections. And then at that point, the vast majority of Americans sadly just kind of, I call it elect and forget. They just, okay, you said you were going to represent me, so get out there and do it. And then we sit back, again, the vast majority of us, and we sit around and we complain over a beer or a cup of coffee or whatever, that they're not doing a great job. And it's because we have to do better. We as citizens have to do better at communicating with each other and with our representatives to get them to do what we're looking to have them do. Thomas Paine, back in the day of the Declaration of Independence, so back in the late 1700s, he said, those who wish to reap the blessings of freedom must undergo the fatigue of supporting it. It's an fatigue, okay? It's an ongoing thing. You have to be involved on an ongoing basis, and that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this show is to try to do that, try to express that, and try to help others, and hopefully part of the dialogue knows. And wherever you are, if you're watching live, please make a comment here. The Facebook Live thing is working well. This also ends up on my YouTube channel. But please make comments. I'll try to get back to you as best I can. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, because I feel like, so one of the issues, and if you watched other shows, you'll hear me talk about this in the future, at least in this country, we have these two political parties. And these are the puppet masters. These are the wealthy, powerful people that try to hold sway and influence. And the rest of us, they try to put us on strings. And they're fairly good at, influence us by use of money. So they can, produce information and call it news. That's really just opinion, an opinion aligned with whatever their agendas are. And unfortunately, we're not doing a very good job of being good citizens and understanding, the true information, the facts, the who, what, when, and where, and then coming to our own conclusions about what that means. So we're accepting what other people tell us it means, and very often following fairly blindly, unfortunately, one group of puppeteers versus the other. Well, on a global scale, we have various countries, and the United States being one of them. All right, we are one of the countries that tries to be a puppeteer around the world. My personal view is, and I think most historians would agree, that some of those efforts have been more humanitarian based and just generically more positive. But some of them are clearly, just plays to, oil is one of the big things. So energy, oil, to try to gain or maintain access to these kinds of raw materials around the world, or ensure that that's available. And sadly, that's the driving force behind some of the things that we have done. Our nation has done. Our leaders have asked us to support, and we've supported them. Okay, again, puppeteers. They've done their jobs, and there's other countries around the world that do the same thing. And we have also tried to influence. As an independent country, we've tried to influence other regimes, other governments around the world. Again, sometimes for the right reasons, I would call them, humanitarian reasons, to try to establish something that's positive for the people there. But again, very often not. And where I'm headed with this is we've got to get to the place where we start leveraging and more fulfilling the mandate of the United Nations. So the United Nations was formed to try to get all these countries, and we're a member of the United Nations, and there's 100 and whatever, it's 160 members or something. It's most of the countries around the world are members of the United Nations. And the intent was that we were going to peacefully use that organization to help so that all the countries could help police each other. And we're not doing a very good job of that. We're not doing a very good job encouraging the United Nations to do their job, and we're not participating through that process. The negative of it is, of course, that there's a much larger influence from all the different countries, and so it might move more slowly. But the great positive thing is, especially if we truly embrace the intent, and all the other countries and their representatives in the United Nations all embrace the intent, we can do so much better on a global scale. And what I'm specifically thinking of is a country that gets themselves into trouble because their government, almost always it's a corrupt thing. So the government's corrupt, and maybe had some problems because one of the, Russia or the United States or one of the China or one of the other, whoever, the so-called superpowers are at the time, have been in there trying to, attach the puppet strings, and the government gets unstable or is destabilized through their efforts, and then, there's the so-called regime change. And the big negative of regime change now, and there's two sides of it, is one is, again, countries have a tendency to kind of go it alone. So if the Russians think that a certain place needs to be in a certain way and they want to have influence there, they send their own troops. It's not a United Nations thing, it's a Russian thing. And the United States does that too. And then you have these wars, civil wars, that are instigated or fomented by these other governments outside those nations. And again, sometimes for humanitarian reasons, but very often for the accumulation of wealth, influence, and power. And it's a very bad thing. And then the other thing that we do is, so there's the troops and military, and then there's the sanctions, these economic sanctions. So we'll basically, put effectively trade blockades around these countries so that they really can't, their economies collapse and all that. And all of that is to try to force the people of the country to rebel against their leaders, but in the end, the people suffer mightily, and the leaders are almost always the last ones to suffer because usually they have the military behind them, and they kind of go out and take what they want, and then so the average person is just families and whatnot just suffer horrifically. And right now, Syria has been an issue that's been going on for a handful of years now. And right now, Venezuela, over the last year or two, year or so, I guess, is really, really, really in a bad way. Their economy has crashed. And the leadership, there's this, again, this civil war basically going on, and some negotiation over trying to resolve it, but the end of at the end of the line is you have the average person in Venezuela or Syria, for example, just examples. Wow, they're really, really, really struggling with poverty and hunger and starvation. And so this is where, again, we should reinvigorate the United Nations, go into this organization, and along with the other nations around the world, look, we can do this better. And the proposal would be that we would come up with a standardized way that if a government in a particular country is clearly abusing the citizens of that country, and we could have a test that the UN would offer is like, well, if these things are going on, then clearly your government is not representing your people well enough, or you're not supporting the people well enough, and therefore the United Nations as a whole, so all, we're going to have peacekeepers from 35 nations or 80 nations or whatever, we're going to come to your country and we're going to step into the middle of this with here's a set schedule, here's what we're going to do, and give the people a chance to identify leaders that will really serve them and a structure of government that will work for them. And yes, we're talking about probably 5-year, 10-year periods in many of these countries, but they surely would be so much better off. And then we could also, by using these techniques and the United Nations and having set protocols where the world agrees this is how we're going to do this, then we're going to eliminate a lot of this puppeteering that individual countries are trying to do. And I offer that the United States needs to get out of the business of independent regime change policies. It's bad for us. It's bad for the world. It's time for our species to get sophisticated enough to stop this. And and I've talked about, and I will talk about in the future, for example, Middle East peace. Again, this is another thing, serious part of that, of course. But just generically, the state of Israel and the Palestinians and all the combatants that's going on there. Again, the United Nations, empowered by all the nations, could come in and do a much better job. But there has to be, here's the structure. Here's exactly what we're going to do. Here's where we're going to be. And I proposed this in other locations, but I will propose it now that one of the main things is in the Middle East is, and other areas around the world, by the way, there are these areas that are religious, what's the right word? They are pinnacles of religious importance. The right word's not coming to me, but they're extremely important to various religions, and part of the big problem is these different religions, fight over access and stuff like that to these areas, and it would advance the cause of peace around the world if we could designate, again, working through the United Nations, talk about some of these hotspots around the world where these issues come to be on a regular basis, and establish UN-controlled, with security forces from 100, 150 countries around the world, but it's a UN-controlled area, and these are safe zones, and no weapons of any kind are allowed inside, and they could be fairly large, and patrolled by UN, and monitored for safety, and basically to ensure that any of the religious people throughout the world that would want to be part of these areas could always do so in peace and security and freedom. So, yeah, we're out of time. We're up to 20 minutes. So I just wanted to talk about that. I think we can do so much better. All of us, all people around the world, we can do so much better, but we've got to be more involved in our governments. We've got to be better citizens. And then we've got to work with everyone around the world, not just the neighbors down the street, but also our global neighbors on the other side of the globe. And I would propose strongly using and reinvigorating the UN, the United Nations, and getting that organization working on some of these global issues that we just struggle. They go on for years. The Middle East thing has been going on for decades. So, well, anyway, this has been the Pro and Con Show. Again, I'm Michael James Ott. I hope you find the discussions interesting and thought-provoking. And yeah, get out there and find the truth, right? Who, what, where, and when, and then draw your own conclusions. Hope you have a great evening no matter where you are. Bye for now.